Hi everyone, so this is a weekly quick tip here where I try to, within 10 or 15 minutes, describe a productivity enhancement or a workflow tip or even a general or all-around make your life easier tip when you're working with creating digital content. And so today I'm going to talk about what we all work with here, which is Adobe Photoshop. And I am using Adobe Photoshop CC, which is the latest Creative Cloud release. However, the subject that I'm going to talk about quickly here are smart objects and their functionality and role in working with them in Photoshop. And smart objects have been around in Photoshop for at least a minimum of 6 or 7 years back. So even if you have an older version of Photoshop, you will have the smart object functionality to work with, and it's going to be your saving grace. So I just have a 2000 by 2000 pixel canvas here, and this is my working kind of design document that I'm going to work with. You can kind of ignore what I have here. It's just a color fill layer, which you can go down here into this little icon, and what it'll do is you click solid color at the top, and it'll allow you just to create a background layer. And the cool thing about it is you can kind of tweak that color. So that's what I did. And you can double click on the swatch and I can always just go in here and change my background. It sure beats when you open up Photoshop document by default and you just got that generic background layer that you have to kind of put a fill on with the paint bucket or something. But I digress on that. Today's talk are about smart objects. And the number one reason that you want to be working with smart objects when you're working with digital photographs and stuff like that, or even designs that you painted, is that it allows you to get into a non-destructive editing workflow. And so by destructive, I mean opening up an image and painting on it and blurring it and cutting it with these tools and even using the eraser tool on it, and that permanently changing the image so that at that point, once you've made those edits, you hit File Save, you close your work out for the day, and you open it in the morning, and it is still cut, it is still erased, it is still blurred, and you can't go Edit, Undo, you can't go Control Z, you can't go in your History tab and your History States and backtrack. So that's destructive because there's no coming back from that. The original high-resolution data after your edits is lost or destroyed. Smart objects resolve that problem with non-destructive editing. So what we're going to do is I would just navigate to my folder with the cool imagery I like, find a picture I like, and I think I had already looked at this. We're going to use this little girl here, this Girl Scout, wearing these cool smart glasses, and I'm not going to work with this image here, the source, so I'm just going to click in the image, hold down the left mouse button, I'm going to drag it onto my canvas, go back to the source, close it. Now I have a copy of this image embedded at its full resolution. We're only 2000 pixels by 2000 pixels, but that image was, I believe, like if we look at it, image size, 4,800 pixels. That is a really good high resolution source image. Whenever you start your designs, try as hard as you can to get the highest resolution you can get. Definitely when you want to work non-destructively. You always want to be able to reference that highest resolution. So I want to make some edits to this image, but I always want to have a backup. So I'm going to left mouse drag this down into the layer button down here next to the trash can, and that will duplicate my layer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I will hit Control G with it selected, and I will type something like backup, and I will hide it. So what this does is no matter what edits I do on this layer up here, I will always have this reference backup of the original source embedded in my document, and I can always fall back on having that. You don't have to do this. It's not part of smart objects. It is just something I've learned over the years to just set that up for myself, okay? But we're going to work on this image, okay? So I want to scale it down to kind of fit into my canvas better. I'm going to hit Control T. I'm going to grab a corner, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key. I don't know what it is on a Mac. Maybe it's the not the Apple key. There is an Alt equivalent. I'm going to scale it down to kind of fit on my canvas, And so that was a permanent thing. If my boss, and by permanent I mean it was pretty much destructive. So my boss has said, well, we need a 300 pixel graphic, 300 pixel wide graphic. So I'm going to scale it down, and I can see my little dialog box there, and I'm going to leave it right around 300 pixels. So it is, as you would expect, it looks good at 300 pixels. Perfect. However, my boss comes back to me and says, we need a 1,000 pixel wide image for print. We're not just going to use this on the web. So I'm going to hit Control T, and my instinct is going to be, let's go back up. Let's make this big for print. Double click to finish. And then I'm going to look at my image, and I'm going to go, oh, what has happened? What has happened? This image has become blurry, horrible, and unusable, right? That was because when I scaled this down to 300 pixels wide, and it was 1,000 pixels wide, those other 700 pixels that were part of that image data, Photoshop just removed them. It deleted the extraneous 700 pixels. It said, I only need 300. Okay? So this is, using that amount of pixel data. So when I scale it back up, it says, well, now you want to use 2,000. It has to interpolate, which just means it takes one pixel that sits next to the other pixel, and it tries to blend them using algorithms and guessing kind of, well, what's the color blend between the two? And that blending is what creates this blurriness and lack of definition. This is destructive. If I were to go File, Save, X out and close this and open this in the morning, I say destroyed because there's no coming back from this. I could try to run filter, sharpen, unsharp mask. I'm never going to retain my original quality. This is not how we want to work. We want to work to where I could scale this image to any arbitrary size. I could scale this to 10 pixels. I could scale it back up to 3,000 pixels, and my resolution would never blur like this. Okay, so smart objects are going to be what resolve that. So I'm going to delete that. I'm actually going to grab my backup. I'm going to drag it down and duplicate it, and I'm going to bring it up outside my backup folder and hide it. This is why creating the backup is great. I always have this to source again. So this is the typical standard pixel-based, raster-based image that you would get off of Google Images or something like that. Okay, so anything we do to it would be destructive, but we want to work with it as a smart object. So we will hover over the textual part of the layer here, right-click, and we would click this Convert to Smart Object. What this will do at this point will say, this is still based on pixels. However, when we're just working on a non-smart object version of the image, like this image right here, it's only got this one state of pixels. It can only exist in one state. So if it is 1,000 pixels wide now, that is its state, and that's the only state it knows. And if I bring it down to 300 or so, then that is the state that it knows, 300 pixels. And if I scale it back up, it has lost a tremendous amount of data, and it does that interpolation thing. However, smart objects, when it's converted to that, it always stores the source high resolution pixel data. So it says, I always know that I am at heart a 4,800 pixel image. I am a huge high resolution source image, and it puts it in its pocket and keeps that data available to you. So it says, Photoshop's telling you, well, let's scale you down to, let's be ridiculous, and make this a 79 pixel wide image. This is an icon, right? This is a ridiculously small image, 78 pixels. And you would think if you were to scale this back up and say, well, boss doesn't want it as an icon anymore, how could I possibly take an icon to a billboard size print resolution? Well, smart objects allow you to do that. Control T, hold down the Alt key, grab a corner, bring it back up. We'll go and look at it. And the wizardry and magic of Adobe's programmers becomes clear to us. I can even go higher. I can even go up. And not only that, we will get even crisper resolution the more we scale up into its highest resolution, which is 4,800 pixels. And that's why getting the highest resolution images is key. So your ability to scale this and be non-destructive to it, you don't lose any pixel data. It maintains it no matter any arbitrary resolution. That is probably the first core pillar of how awesome these are. And that's what I mean by non-destructive. We can go all day long. Someone could pick this up after me, and as long as this is a smart object, they can work with this and rescale it, and they won't lose quality. They won't lose any quality at all. We can go ridiculously high. And what you have to remember is we literally just saved this as a 78 pixel image, 78 pixels. And now we're at 3,000, 1,000, 2,000, and we're not doing, there's nothing happening to the pixel data. It's not being destroyed at all. However, this comes with a small catch, and it's a different sort of way of thinking about how you work with these images. So because it's a smart object now, it is an arbitrary range of pixel resolutions it could be. So it's kind of removed itself from being directly editable as pixel data because it could be any amount of pixels. So if I say I went in here to use the eraser tool and I just want to erase part of it, I get this weird icon that pops up that says, no, you don't. Wrong way, turn around. If I click it, it says a smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. So once we rasterize it, it becomes pixel data that is set. This is a known, defined amount of pixels when it's rasterized. It's not rasterized, I didn't rasterize it. But it is a defined, known amount of 2,000 pixels wide. However, as a smart object, this is an undefined amount of pixels. And that's what allows that amazing ability to scale down to 5 pixels wide all the way to 3,000. However, we can't clone on it. I can't erase on it. We can't use the clone stamp on it or the healing brush, but you can. You just can't do it directly to this smart object on your canvas. The way that you edit them is you hover over this thumbnail for the layer. It will even actually tell you on the screen, smart object thumbnail. Double click it. This will open up the image that's embedded in it at its highest resolution. This is the embedded image that this document or your canvas is referencing. And so this has all your typical layers that you can go in here and you can, let's say I want to blur it. I hit OK. I save it. Let's go back to my original document. The smart object is now blurred on that layer. So you kind of edit it externally. You can Z back on this. You can go back in history states. You can actually go in here and add new layers to this and go in here and let me try to demonstrate this a little. Bring up the brush. Let's paint something ridiculous. Hit Control S. Go back. You don't get any increased layers. It's still a single smart object, but you still have this editable document here. I can close it. We come back. I don't want to rasterize it. I double click it. We come back. We still have our layers. It's smart. It keeps the layers. Right? So if you want to edit it and you want to do something on this, like say, oh geez, let's say we don't like the freckles. The last time I tried to record this video, I removed her eye and it was just a little too disturbing. So let's remove any facial blemishes using the clone stamp. That doesn't look good. I'm doing this very hasty, so it looks improper. And then we'll just minimize that, go back. And as you'll see, that spot where I cloned is there, but you don't see the freckle. If we were to go back, and I go back on the history on this, and then we go back to our document, her freckles have returned. So that's how you edit. And you can do every normal thing you can do to a raster layer here when you double click on your smart object. I'm going to remove that blue. And there you go. So that's how you edit your smart object layer. So if the scalability thing, to be able to scale your images down and then scale them back up with zero blurriness or interpolation or pixelation, if that wasn't enough wizardry and magic to your toolbox, the next thing is probably even better. So the next thing is I'm going to duplicate this layer and I'm going to right click on it. And we're going to rasterize it so that you see it as a normal rasterized pixel-based image. And I'm going to hide my smart objects so you can see the destructive part and then the non-destructive way. So let's say filter gallery, and say I wanted to do some kind of painterly effect. And in my filters, I go to paint daubs and we add something that looks a little like maybe an oil painting. And then we go back and it looks cool. It actually looks like something that might have been painted on canvas, right? It's important to note that I use these artistic effects like paint effects and stuff like this a lot, but I won't do them on the core focus of my image. I'll generally do them on background elements I want to subdue, and we'll use a mask to kind of mask out the subject focus and all of that. But for this demo and example, we're doing it this way. So this was destructive. Just like the scaling up and down on a raster-based image destroys its pixels too. This gets what we want done accomplished, but if we ever need to tweak this, like, oh, the boss says this is too much oil paint. We need this to look more like the original photo, but you've already taken it this far. Well, I closed this document after this, and I saved it and shut my computer down, and I came back in the morning. I don't have any history states. I don't have any undos. This is set this way. Now I have to go back, find my source image in Windows. I have to go back in here and place it and scale it again and try to get it in the exact right position. I have to reapply masks that I had applied. So that's why I say destructive, but we want to work non-destructively. So let's take that same filter, turn on our smart object layer. Let's apply that to a smart object. Filter gallery. Let's see the paint thing. So we get the identical effect, right? There's no difference when I hide and show the raster-based layer and this layer, but the raster-based layer is stuck in this state forever. However, the smart object layer is not. And you'll see here in my layer palette the difference. Underneath of the smart object, it has created a smart filter, which works extremely similar to a layer style. It is editable and non-destructive. Best, it can be hidden, right? You can turn it off. If the boss doesn't approve of this, doesn't like the effect, just disable it. But if the boss says, I like it, but we need it more subtle, you can hover over this filter gallery here and double click it. Go in here, take a look. Say, well, let's turn the sharpness down. Let's turn the brush size down. Go back, and now the effect is a lot more subtle, right? It's more subtle. And we can disable it and turn it off. When I save this document and I close it and come back in the morning, or when another artist or designer opens this up, they will see this layer, this smart filter attached like a layer style, and they'll know that this is editable, right? This is extremely powerful versus this. Like say I didn't have the smart object and this is all I had, just this pixel-based, this raster-based. There's nothing I can do to salvage this for changes. That's a rework. That's a rework. This is not a rework. This is a turn off an eyeball, or go into double click the filter and go in and try it. I can go in here. I can even go in here and change the filter. It's not stuck. You can do everything to that you want within that gallery there. It's completely editable for anything. You can even stack these things. So say I wanted to blur one element, maybe not my entire image like I'm doing now, but just one element. I can go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and normally on a pixel-based image, like if I were to do it on the raster pixel-based one, blur, Gaussian blur, that's done. I can never unblur that. I could in the current session by using my history and going back, Control-Z, undo, go back in history states, but once it's saved and closed, I can't. The change is permanent. It's destroyed. However, if I did that on a smart object, which I did, there's my Gaussian blur. I can actually turn either or off, and I can double click it, and I can go too much blur. Let's do a value of blur of 2. I don't want blur at all. Boss says no blur. Just turn it off. That's amazing. So when I talked at the beginning of the video about non-destructively editing and allowing your coworkers to non-destructively edit your work, this is what I was talking about. Working the the other way with pixel-based imagery like this, everything's final. What you do is pretty much final. So those were the two things: the scalability of working with the high-res source always being available to you with this, and then the ability to apply smart filters, which it's not even that. There is an unbelievable amount of different things that can be done to this, not even just smart filters, and it will keep that information and data intact. So hopefully I've expressed to everyone the value of working with smart objects, and hopefully you start integrating that into your workflow, especially when you're working with imagery. I think the next tip that I would go to will be related to this, and it'll be looking at these vector smart objects, like basically these shapes you can draw, or this pen tool where you can kind of draw things with the pen. And right off the bat, you're kind of like, well, I'm not a person who draws, or I'm not an artist. But actually, that's not how I really use them for the most part. These types of line-based shapes that are vector shapes in tandem with smart objects used as masks, vector layer masks, are really powerful. The amount of non-destructive editing you can do to your masking with this, it even has built-in feathering to soften the edges of your mask by just tweaking a value over here in the layer panel over here. So everything is editable after the fact. It's really amazing. And so we'll share that on the next one. I don't want this video to run too tremendously long. Thank you for watching.